We do have some breaking news out of New York to get to. Convicted rapist Harvey Weinstein has been sentenced to 23 years behind bars. The 67-year-old was convicted of raping an aspiring actress and sexually assaulting a former production assistant. Weinstein must also register as a sex offender. The maximum sentence for his crimes was 29 years in prison. His lawyers had argued for a shorter sentence, citing health issues. Joining me now with reaction and some analysis to this is CTV's legal analyst, Ed Prutschi. Ed, 23 years, what do you make of that?
Wow.
If you're saying wow,
not
then the
my
rest
prediction.
of us can say it wow.
No, not my prediction at all. So I'm glad nobody asked me beforehand, but I'll confess that's not where I would have thought, whatsoever. Look, obviously, first of all, when we do comparisons between Canadian sentencing and U.S. sentencing, there's a big gulf typically in between those. So, it's not what we would be used to in Canada. But even by U.S. standards, it's important to remember he was not convicted of the most serious counts. He was actually acquitted on those. So he was found guilty, obviously, of serious crimes, but not the most serious of the ones he had been facing. So he's found guilty on 2 of those. He's got a minimum sentence of 5 years is what was available, up to a range of a maximum of 26. The defense was, of course, suggesting the minimum, 5 years. Huge gulf between what the prosecution was asking for and what the defense was asking for. And the judge was hearing almost none of what the defense sought. So here you've got a guy, 67 years old, I believe it is, seemingly in frail health. I think a lot of people sort of roll their eyes at that because he seemed a lot healthier prior to the commencement of the trial and prior to the commencement of the charges. But, it is what it is. 23 years is, as his own defense lawyer put it before this sentence was handed down, a death sentence.
Hang on, we're getting some live reaction from New York, Ed.
Rosie, how you feeling? What do you think? How do you feel? Rosie, how do you feel? How do you feel, Jessica? Tell us.
Ed, for the accusers, we can't even put into words what this moment must be like for them.
Look, I suspect, I don't know, obviously, but I suspect they didn't expect this either. I think there were a lot of people who, first of all, didn't necessarily expect a conviction. And
right,
so,
they didn't think,
they thought, how are we ever going to prove this? Powerful individual. He's been doing this for decades. Even though this related to 2 women, there were so many other women, some of whom were in the courtroom, others of whom we heard about but weren't in the courtroom. All of them thinking, here was a guy who's always managed to, quote unquote, get away with it. He would get away with it again. So there was, I think, some surprise that he was convicted of some things. But even then, when people looked at it and said, well, he wasn't convicted of the most serious ones, we tried, but even those the jury wasn't prepared to convict him on, I think there was probably a lot of expectation that he would get a relatively light sentence, that power and influence and money would secure that for him. And so they're looking at this now, and clearly that's not the case.
And you say, wow, I spoke with a legal analyst in New York in the first hour of our program this morning who said she expected 5 years.
There you go.
And she thought that his frail health would actually factor into it. Here we are, 23 years. So what does it mean now for the other cases that he still faces in Los Angeles?
Well, that can go 2 ways, right? It's a bit of a double-edged sword. I mean, on the one hand, you look at that, the charges he's facing in Los Angeles are actually in many respects more serious than the ones he was already convicted of. So you're looking at that thinking, oh my goodness, he's really in trouble with respect to those. Certainly, it's extraordinarily difficult to assure him a fair trial in any way, shape, or form when he's been convicted and hammered on sentencing on the New York charges. But equally, there may be the perception that, why bother? I don't think too many people are going to be saying that, but I wonder whether there's some sort of thought process within the district attorney's office that says, assuming this sentence stands, and that's an assumption because he is going to be appealing almost certainly, but assuming this sentence stands, you've got a 67-year-old in whatever health that he's in, 23 years, the likelihood that whatever happens in Los Angeles is going to substantively matter on his sentence is actually fairly low. Having said that, there is a public interest, though, in not telling women in Los Angeles, you don't matter because we already got what we wanted in New York. So I don't think there's going to be a rush to just say this is irrelevant, but there will be some consideration to what happened in New York and asking themselves the question, do you really want to go through this? How necessary is it? And what impact does it have on fair trial rights?
Final question. Does this this sentencing of 23 years set a precedent in any way?
It's clearly designed to send a message, right? A message of general deterrence, a message in the era of Me Too. The judge couldn't help but be doing that intentionally. When you look at a 5-year minimum, a 26-year maximum, and you provide 23 years to a 67-year-old under these circumstances, that's clearly a message that this judge wanted sent, that says these are serious offenses, and I don't care who you are, I don't care how old you are, I don't care how sick you are, you're going to pay the price, and that price is going to be extreme. So it's a lower court ruling. It's not an appellate court ruling. It's not binding on other courts around New York or even across the nation. But the message is for sure sent. And ultimately, with an appeal, there are risks, obviously, with an appeal, too, because if he loses that appeal, then it does become binding. It becomes a different kind of message. It's not just a message to the public. It's a message to justices and judges across the U.S.
Ed Prutschi, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate you being with us.